Everyone knows this image. The agonized figure on the bridge, mouth open, hands pressed to the sides of its face, screaming against a sky that looks like it is on fire. It is one of the most reproduced images in the history of art. It has been turned into a mask, a balloon, a meme, a Halloween costume, an emoji. It has become so familiar that most people stopped actually looking at it a long time ago. And that is exactly why almost everyone has the painting completely wrong. The figure in this painting is not screaming. It never was. The scream is not coming from the figure. It is coming from the sky, from the landscape itself, from the air. The figure has pressed its hands to its ears because it is trying to block the sound out, trying and failing to protect itself from something vast and overwhelming that no one else around it seems to hear. Once you understand this, everything in the painting shifts. The open mouth is not a cry of anguish directed outward. It is a gasp, a response to being assaulted by a sensation so extreme that the body has no other way to process it. And the sky, that violent, swirling, blood-red sky that we have always treated as a backdrop, is not a backdrop at all. It is the subject. It is the thing that is screaming. The figure is the one being screamed at. We know this because Munch wrote it down. The night it happened. On the 22nd of January, 1892, Edvard Munch made an entry in his diary that describes with unusual precision the experience that became the scream. He was walking along a road outside Oslo at sunset with two friends when he suddenly fell behind, overwhelmed by a sensation he could not immediately name. The sky turned blood red. He stopped walking. He felt what he described as an infinite scream passing through nature. His friends kept walking, oblivious. Munch stood still, trembling, experiencing something his companions simply could not perceive. That distance between Munch and his friends, between what he was feeling and what the people around him were feeling, is in the painting. Look at the two figures in the background of the image, small and dark, continuing along the bridge. They are not reacting. They are not stopping. They appear not to hear anything at all. Munch is alone in what he is experiencing, even in the presence of other people. And that particular kind of loneliness, the loneliness of a sensation that belongs entirely to you, that cannot be shared or explained, is what the painting is actually about. What the diary entry does not explain, and what Munch himself may not have fully understood, is that the sky he saw that evening was almost certainly real. In August of 1883, the Krakatoa volcano in present-day Indonesia had erupted in one of the largest volcanic events in recorded history. The explosion was heard nearly 5,000 kilometers away. The eruption ejected so much ash and sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere that it altered the color of sunsets across the entire planet for the next 18 months. Observers across Europe, North America, and Asia reported skies of extraordinary violent color. Deep reds, burning oranges, vivid purples, particularly in the hours after sunset. Newspapers at the time filled with letters from readers describing skies that looked like the world was on fire. Some thought it was a genuine apocalypse. Munch saw one of these skies over Oslo in January 1892, nearly 9 years after the eruption, when the atmospheric effects were still occasionally visible under the right conditions. The sky and the scream is not a product of his imagination. It is a meteorological record. And what Munch experienced that evening was not madness. It was a highly sensitive man being genuinely overwhelmed by a real natural phenomenon that most of the people around him either did not notice or did not feel as intensely. The man behind the image. To understand why this experience affected Munch as profoundly as it did, you need to understand who he was before he ever stood on that bridge. Edvard Munch was born in 1863 in Loten, Norway. His mother died of tuberculosis when he was 5 years old. His older sister, Sophie, to whom he was intensely close, died of the same disease when he was 13. His father was a deeply religious man who suffered from severe depression and whom Munch later described as pathologically anxious, prone to seeing sin and divine punishment everywhere. Another sister was later institutionalized with mental illness. Munch grew up inside a household organized around grief, fear, and the constant proximity of death. He wrote in his diary with the directness of someone who had stopped trying to soften the truth. Illness, madness, and death were the black angels that kept watch over my cradle and accompanied me throughout my life. By the time he reached adulthood, Munch was drinking heavily, involved in a series of relationships that ended in emotional catastrophe, and producing paintings that his contemporaries in Norway found deeply unsettling and in some cases morally offensive. He was not yet the Munch we know. He was a struggling, frequently ill, increasingly unstable painter, living in a city that was not sure what to make of him. When The Scream was first exhibited in Berlin in 1893, it provoked a reaction somewhere between fascination and alarm. Critics did not know whether to treat it as art or as evidence of mental disturbance. In a way, they were right that the boundary was hard to locate. Why there are 4 of them? Here is something that surprises most people. The Scream is not one painting. There are 4 versions of it, created between 1893 and 1910, using different materials and formats. 2 are executed in pastel. 1 is a tempera painting. 1 is a lithograph, a print that could be reproduced in multiples. The most famous version, the one in the National Gallery of Norway in Oslo, is the tempera painting. A second pastel version was sold at auction in 2012 for nearly $120 million, making it at the time one of the most expensive artworks ever sold at public auction. Munch returned to this image again and again, not because it was commercially successful, though it eventually became that, but because the experience itself would not leave him alone. The sensation he had felt on the bridge persisted in his consciousness as something unresolved, something that had not yet been fully captured. This is a pattern in his work. He rarely painted a subject once and moved on. He circled his obsessions: death, anxiety, desire, illness. The way you circle something you are afraid to approach directly, trying different angles, different materials, different scales, as though somewhere in the variations the image would finally say everything it needed to say. In 1908, 15 years after the first version of The Scream, Munch suffered a complete nervous collapse and checked himself into a psychiatric clinic in Copenhagen, where he remained for 8 months. After his release, he changed his habits entirely. He stopped drinking. He moved to the Norwegian countryside, away from the city and its social pressures. He worked constantly. He lived alone. He kept the paintings he loved most in a large collection he called his children, and he refused to sell them. He died in 1944 at the age of 80, having outlived almost everyone he had been close to. The house he left behind contained over 1,000 paintings, more than 4,000 drawings, and thousands of prints. He had left them all to the city of Oslo in his will. What the painting is really about. Now that you know all of this, the diary entry, the Krakatoa sky, the family history, the 4 versions, the nervous collapse, what is The Scream? It is not a painting about screaming. It is a painting about receiving, about what happens to a person who is constitutionally unable to filter out sensation the way most people do, who walks through the world with no protective layer between themselves and what the world is giving off. The figure on the bridge is not performing anguish for the viewer. It is trying to survive an experience that is, in its own way, beautiful and devastating in equal measure. The sky is extraordinary. The sky is also unbearable. Both of those things are true at once, and the figure's expression, that open mouth, those wide, hollow eyes, is the face of someone who cannot decide which feeling to surrender to. Munch himself said, years later, that he did not paint what he saw, but what he felt. That sentence is quoted so often, it has become almost meaningless. But if you stand in front of the original painting in Oslo and take it seriously, it points to something important. The Scream is a first-person account. It is not a depiction of a universal human experience. It is the record of a specific moment on a specific bridge, experienced by a specific man who happened to be more sensitive than most to the information the world was broadcasting that evening. The 2 dark figures in the background are still walking. They will always be walking. They will never stop to look at the sky. That is the painting, not the open mouth, not the swirling color. The distance between the figure who stopped and the 2 who did not. I'd love to know, before today, did you think the figure in this painting was the one screaming, or had you ever heard the real story behind it? And do you think what Munch felt on that bridge was closer to madness or to something most of us simply aren't sensitive enough to feel? Let me know in the comments. I'd really love to hear your thoughts.